Hi, everybody. This is Lee, and the Black Girl Magic series continues with Sojourner Truth, a woman who was born into slavery in 1797 in New York, but who transcended her position to have a tremendous effect on the rights of African Americans and then also women. She participated in women's rights movements and the suffrage movement. But before then, she was born into slavery in New York, where it was still legal to hold slaves, to a Dutch family. And so her first language was not English. Her first language was Dutch. And she spoke Dutch only until she was about 10 years old, um, having been sold and sold again and sold again and sold again to English speaking families. And so having to learn that language. And so the Ain't I a Woman speech that she is most famous for was written with a Southern slave dialect, but that's what happens when someone else interprets for you. Sojourner Truth was not from the South. She was, again, born in New York, and that Dutch was her first language. So that was interesting, but not the most interesting thing about her life. Um, so she actually gave herself a different name from her original birth name, Isabella Baumfree. She changed it to Sojourner Truth in 1843 because she felt a calling. But many things happened along the road to then. Um, so she was born to a slave family, a slave-holding family, a Dutch slave-holding family in New York. She was sold and sold again and sold again and sold again as a little girl, having experienced sexual abuse and physical abuse by her owners. She came to be owned by a family called Dumont, and there is questions about that family as well being seen as more kind masters, but the fact that that family owned her, were her owners, and that she was property and that she was treated like property and she had no freedom to come and go meant how kind was that ownership if she was held in bondage. And the fact that the male member of the family may have been the father of one of her children, willingly or not, we do know that the wife mistreated Sojourner Truth. And so there's that dilemma where there was abuse against her as a female, the fact that she had no autonomy or self determination over her own body to refuse advances, and then being property, and then the wife of her owner persecuting her for that. And so Sojourner Truth did actually leave her slave status uh, prior to the end of slavery in New York because her owner did promise to emancipate her. And then he reneged on that promise, saying that she hadn't worked hard enough for him. And so he reneged on his promise to free her. And so she left, taking one child with her, and then actually going to court to recover another child that had been sold away from her by this kind owner. And so she went to court and she won ownership of her own child that way. So again, we see that this unusual case that hadn't been done much previously of a slave or former slave going into the court system to recover her child. And so she did, and that took a lot of determination, and she determined to do that. Okay, and so 1826, she escaped, she recovered her son, and she went and got her son through the court system. She then met a group of people who were religious in nature. She had a life changing religious experience, and she became a Christian herself. And so she befriended people who were interested in performing charitable acts for the poor. And then she had a turning point in 1843. She became a Methodist, and that's when she changed her name to Sojourner Truth. And so she had joined a group, and at Millerite Adventist, and it seems like it was kind of a fringe Christian group that were pretty sure that Jesus would come back in 1843 and 1844, and he did not. And so she left that group. She joined the Northampton Association of Education and Industry. It was a type of commune that had their own industries. They were abolitionists. They promoted women's rights, religious tolerance, and pacifism. And so they had about 470 acres. They had livestock, a sawmill, a grist mill, a silk factory, but it was unable to sustain itself and it disbanded. But prior to that, Sojourner Truth did meet William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, and David Ruggles. And so she was already breathing rare air. She dictated her memoirs to Olive Gilbert, a friend of hers. And then William Lloyd Garrison published that book, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, a Northern Slave. And so she set down her life story up until that point in her own words. And she purchased a home in Northampton, and she started speaking. She spoke to the National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester, Massachusetts in 1854. And then she continued her speaking in 1851. She went on an abolitionist circuit, and then she had the famous Ain't I a Woman speech, demanding equal human rights for all women as well as all Black people. And so, again, we see that there's double duty, that Black women, such as Sojourner Truth, are working twice as hard, not only for racial equality, but also for gender equality, making sure that women are not left out of power positions, and then certainly not Black women. And so there were 10 years of her speaking. She worked with the editor of the Ohio Anti-Slavery Bugle. She traveled and she spoke with suffragists, Northampton camp meetings, abolitionist convention, American Equal Rights Association. And so some of her speeches have been transcribed. And so she continued to do that, but then she sold all of her possessions and relocated herself to Battle Creek, Michigan from New York in 1857. And she joined the Millerite movement, which had by then formed the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so she continued with her anti-slavery work in Michigan and Ohio. She joined the Progressive Friends, who she already knew, and continued her anti-slavery abolitionist work. During the Civil War, Sojourner Truth helped to recruit Black troops for the Union Army. And her son enlisted in the Army. This was James Caldwell, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. And then in 1864, Sojourner Truth was employed by the National Freedmen's Relief Association, and she worked to improve conditions for African Americans. She met Abraham Lincoln, and then in 1865, she interacted with him while working at the Freedmen's Hospital. And during that time, apparently she rode in streetcars deliberately in order to help foster desegregation. And so this was about 100 years before Rosa Parks. There was Sojourner Truth attempting to integrate and desegregate public transportation. And then as I mentioned in the Ida B. Wells video, that Ida B. Wells also did that prior at this time, that time in trains, prior to Rosa Parks. So it was a long time coming. A lot of work went in. She was also a songwriter. Sojourner Truth was. She visited with people such as Amy Post, and she tried to secure land grants from the federal government for former enslaved people. She pursued that effort for about 7 years, but was unsuccessful. That 40 acres and a mule, she was trying to get it for us, but there was pushback on that. She also had a meeting with Ulysses S. Grant in the White House. She tried her best to vote in the presidential election in her hometown of Battle Creek, Michigan, but she was turned away from the polls. And so, strides were being made even way back in the day, over approximately 100 years before the civil rights movement really gained steam. So she met again like Amy Post, Francis Gage, Wendell Phillips, William Lloyd Garrison, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, people like that, breathing rare air, mixing in circles, striving for abolitionism, racial equality, and then women's rights as well. And so people have been recognizing Sojourner Truth for her double roles, her double efforts to transcend her birth status as being held as property, to leave that status, to use the court system to recover her child, to push forward for equality, not for just herself, but also for all Black people and then all women as well. Twice as hard. So she's been honored, rightfully so. There are just many lists of major institutions, schools, libraries that are named for her. Sojourner Truth, either her first or her last name. That she also had the NASA Mars Pathfinder named after her. The robotic rover Sojourner was named that for her, and a very appropriate name it was. There's an asteroid that was discovered in 2014 that was named Truth in honor of her. So she's internationally, intergalactically known for her efforts. And then also, most recently, she's apparently going to appear on the $10 bill in honor of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So Sojourner Truth was a tremendous personality, a tremendous worker for rights in terms of social, cultural rights, and then political rights as well. She was very tireless, very influential in her efforts, recognized by her peers, and even today she is recognized for her work. And that's why she's Black Girl Magic.